Hi, my name is Elise Gregg, and here's my video for discussion one. As a brief caveat before I get started, I'm going to list some of the resources and citations I have in this video, but to keep it under 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to include them all, so they're all going to be in the text below. Anyways, starting with question one, U.S. history and the criminal justice system. Starting from the very beginning, the key characteristic and defining factor of our system is the colonial and revolutionary Americans inheriting the common law tradition from England, emphasizing the importance of precedent and procedure in the legal system. And aside from a few adjustments, we kept it pretty similar. Other revolutionary decisions would also define a lot of our process today. For example, the Bill of Rights, telling us what rights we have and don't have as citizens when it comes to the courts. For example, we've got the right to due process, trial by jury, etc. Later parts of American history, social movements would end up being very impactful when it came to criminal justice. For example, Encyclopedia and deathpenaltyinfo.org discuss how the antebellum period had the anti-slavery movement, which of course in and of itself is impactful on criminal justice, but out of that came the anti-capital punishment movement, where we see that even today, states are half and half when it comes to the legality of that. Later, we would see other movements like civil rights, gay rights, ask what are we criminalizing, how are we addressing certain crimes, etc. And then finally, one of the more recent characteristics comes from get tough policies when it comes to crime. We see how those also lead to higher incarceration rates, which are another defining characteristic of our system today. And a study called Why Are Tough on Crime Policies So Popular from 1999 points out that these these policies lead to higher incarceration rates, which may also lead to violent crime. One of the factors behind these get tough policies, as higher incarceration is shown to continue a cycle of that. Question number 2, looking at table 4.1, there's a lot of data in there that it felt like there were very few similarities that you could really correlate anything or come up with a hypothesis. The commonality is kind of tough on crime policies, but that's about where it stops. And there are definitely qualitative and quantitative differences when it comes to countries. For example, Germany having low crime rates, but then having these very high hate crime rates. So while I was looking at the table, I was kind of struck by a comparison of Britain versus China versus the US, because they're all very different, massively different GDPs, per capita income. China has a much bigger population than either of those nations, but then similar area size to the US, while Britain is much smaller than both of those. But my hypothesis came from the reading where it discussed China having higher rates of urban migration lately and how that has led to a spike in crime, or not that has led to a spike, but there has been recently also a spike in crime. And we see how in the US and Britain there are parallel rates aside from the US's violent crime rate. So my hypothesis was that urban population density may be a key factor to some of these higher rates, and maybe explaining why the US has higher rates, particularly in violent crime. Preliminary research kind of showed that income inequality does remain one of the other key factors, but other research shows that urban population density does add to crime rates. So one study called Patterns of Rural and Urban Crime, a county-level comparison from 2004, shows that there, both internationally and nationally, urban areas tend to have much higher crime rates, higher rates of victimization, etc., than rural areas. And again, this is both in the US and internationally, referencing both that study and some of the studies they reference. And if you look at China, Britain, and the US, all of them have higher rates of urbanization, over 50%. The US and Britain have about 80% urbanization rates. So that's the answer to that question. And then the last one, how does religion impact crime and punishment? As we saw in the reading from this module, religiosity explaining cross-national differences in crime, yes, there is definitely a factor for which, or in which religion does pull back on crime a little bit, although qualitatively we may see some differences. For example, homicide, the one they mentioned in that study. But there's a couple other things too. So one example is cultural and moral norms, which may be part of that study too, but using Saudi Arabia as an example, we see that when perhaps religion is legitimized legally as well as just part of the culture, or when there's this informal social control, how religion can be a damper on the amount of crime that is committed, both belief level or just social norms level. We also see that when there's a punishment aside from just human punishment, there may be more self-restraint out of some kind of fear. And then one study that I looked at, I don't have it written down right here, but it talks about how community ties are a part of that as well. We see it referenced Durkheim's moral community. And that study, which I'll have again linked below, shows a negative inverse relationship with church membership across several U.S. regions, and how just having those community ties, either insured or being closer together, may cause a decrease in crime. So apologies, I know this is about a minute over, but thank you all so much. Have a good one.